Okay, so what is the difference between a daddy dom little girl dynamic and a vanilla dynamic? I'm only going to speak on that. I'm not going to talk about any of the other BDSM dynamics because I think it's too nuanced and too complicated, and sometimes those are just sexual. And daddy dom little girl is not, it's a relationship style. So the difference between a daddy little girl relationship and a vanilla relationship to me is the level of transparency. Transparency is super important to me. So behind anything that you choose to do in life, there could be multiple motivations. Let's say you're a girl, you're in a vanilla relationship, you don't want to take a class at school. You don't necessarily have an obligation to go on about why. You can say, I don't want to take this class. Your partners may be like, why not? I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. And that might be the end of it. In a daddy little girl dynamic, there's more responsibility of a daddy to his little girl, to care for her, to push her, to not push her too far, but make sure she is achieving the goals that are important and reaching her potential. I think a big part of the dynamic is for a daddy to shape his little girl into the best version of herself that he can, and through doing so, he becomes the best version of himself that he can. So he needs to ask questions. Is she not taking this class because she's afraid of failing? Is she not taking the class because she's afraid of failing and disappointing her partner? Is she not taking the class because she's insecure and doesn't want to spend the time away from him? Is it because she's codependent and doesn't want to spend the time away from him? Is she worried about the financial aspect of it? Those are things that aren't for a little girl to worry about. Those are for a daddy to worry about. So a little girl's job is to give her daddy all the information so he can make the decision and decide what's best for her and what's best for them. So there's a level of transparency, and I think through that, oftentimes intimacy that comes with the dynamic that you don't necessarily find in vanilla relationships. Now, I'm very loosely defining vanilla relationships as well because my parents are in a vanilla relationship, but they have a very 50s lifestyle, or a very 50s household. And that's in part just being older, and it was never a spoken thing. That's just how things were. Now a 50s household is a BDSM style or dynamic, and so there's people I think that are in vanilla relationships that are sort of living a BDSM dynamic that aren't even aware of it. So I'm not going to talk about them because there's a different obligation, and that is just something that came naturally as opposed to something that was talked about, discussed, negotiated, and so on, where everybody's needs were just very clearly put on the table. Also, in a lot of vanilla dynamics, people could be very unhappy with the dynamic, whereas in a daddy little girl dynamic, that stuff should be talked about. So there is, so both people are getting their needs met. So I think I'll leave it at that. I don't see any reason to make this video longer than just a couple minutes because at the end of the day, I think the foundation is the same. The underpinnings of a vanilla relationship and a BDSM relationship are very much so the same. I just think that there's a higher responsibility for the little girl or the submissive in the dynamic to be more transparent about what's going on so that the daddy has all the information he needs to make the really difficult or important decisions to I think there's more of a burden, if you will. And for me as a daddy, it doesn't feel like a burden, but I think the burden of worry, so to speak, it should be placed on the daddy. I think that's part of the dynamic. We're more able to deal with those things or think about those things, or we like dealing with and thinking about those things. And the little girl shouldn't have to. So in a vanilla relationship, a lot of times there isn't that sort of structure where there's one person to focus on this thing and another person to focus on this thing. It's the daddy's job to protect his little girl from a lot of that stuff. So there's a higher responsibility of transparency on behalf of the little girl. And I feel like I probably even dragged this out longer than I needed, but I'm just trying to make it really clear that, I think it's super important for that dynamic to be preserved in that way. That makes sense. I don't know. Fuck it. I'm going to put this up. Peace out.